Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Broken Brains with your host, Bruce Parkman, sponsored by the Mac Parkman Foundation, where we look at the issue of repetitive brain trauma in the form of repetitive head impacts from contact sports and repetitive blast exposure to our veteran community, and what these conditions are doing to their brains and causing what is right now the largest preventable cause of mental illness in this country. Why is this important? Because it's not trained in our medical, psychological, or nursing communities. And very few people have the knowledge at this time to look at what's going on in our society and how to treat it. And so you now become that person, the informed individual. We reach out to researchers and patients and players and authors and all kinds of people to give you that 360-degree perspective on this problem that permeates all aspects of our society. Today, another exciting guest. I've met this gentleman before, and he got up on several times to let people know what he was thinking about the issue of subconcussive trauma, repetitive blast exposure. Is Todd Strader. Todd Strader is a U.S. Army veteran. Thank you for your service, sir, and a nationally recognized advocate for brain injury awareness to repeated low-level exposure. After suffering from debilitating symptoms linked to blast overpressure as a mortarman, Strader transformed his personal struggle into a mission to protect and support his fellow members. He has founded Overpressure LLC, which is, I think, a 501c3 dedicated to raising awareness of blast overpressure injuries. I've seen him testify at several events since we've gotten into this. He created the Cohort of Chronically Concussed Mortarmen, C3M, a support network with nearly 3,000 members, and he's invented the Pelta 6, a helmet attachment that's designed to reduce the effects of blast pressure on the head and brains of our servicemen. He's contributed to national investigations in New York Times and other major outlets, collaborating with scientists, clinicians on the issues and effects of subconcussive repetitive blast exposure on the lives of our fellow veterans. He's briefed members of Congress in support of the introduction of the Over Pressure Warfighters Act of 2025, which is a critical piece of legislation that really literally got the government to admit that we have a problem. What are we going to do about it now? And he advocates for approved military health policies, research funding, and protective technologies for blast-exposed troops. And he leads efforts to bridge that gap between lived experience, science, and policy, because he feels that we must ensure that the invisible wounds of war are no longer ignored, which we find continuously in our veteran population. Is also why we have, 10 times the amount of kids that died in war dying of suicide and 8,000 more dying each year. Mr. Trader, what was your rank, sir?
I was an E4 with an Article 15. So
I had 4 of them myself.
I won't make any halls of being a soldier of fame, but I was just an average Joe.
No. Well, thank you for your service, Todd, and welcome to the show.
Bruce,
really appreciate it, man. Well, I've seen your passion, right? I've seen your passion. So talk to a little bit about, your military service, and when did you start recognizing the impact of that service on your life?
Okay. So I was a veteran of the end of the Cold War, Gulf War era. So most of my exposures happened in the training environment. And because I wasn't maybe the best soldier ever, I was on the gun line a long time, almost 6 years, because like I said, that Article 15 held me back a rank for a little bit. So I got to stay on the gun line a little bit longer than everybody else. But because of that, I do have an extraordinary amount of these low level exposures that I was exposed to back then. And back then it was something that, we weren't even, we didn't, Frank Larkin says it best. We didn't know back then. It really wasn't an issue. I think the military leaders have known for decades that these weapons produce hazardous causing blast on the crew, but it's only because of recently that the science has caught on to it, that it's coming into public light. And of course, like you said, making the connection to the behavioral health problems and the suicides. So anyway, back then we didn't know. Biggest thing we had to pay attention to was your hearing. They'd yell at you to put your earplugs in, whatever. But I do remember that during the time I was in, I started developing these chronic headaches. Some of them, sometimes they were debilitating. One time I had one happen to me that was in the field, and I literally fell out of the track, onto my knees, throwing up, my head just feeling like it was caving in. And, back then the medics just treated you, drink water, take some Motrin, change your socks. And, you're not going to get any medals for having a headache. So, go back to duty was basically, what you got back then. And back then I never thought anything of it, that there was any kind of connection to my headaches and the blast overpressure. Cause to be fair, I had hit my head, in airborne school on my last jump pretty hard. So, but I never even thought that was a concussive event that I need to be worried about. It was the last day of airborne school. All I cared about was graduating. So,
Yeah, you do.
nobody's thinking about, do I need to go see doc or anything like that? So years later, after I left service, and then the headaches stuck with me, and then progressively over the next decade or so after I got out, they started getting really bad, where they would be debilitating, more common, more severe. So I got treatment with private medical health, in the private medical healthcare system. Let me just jump in there real quick. I think it's a good time to interject that, because I've been affected by all these blasts, I may come across sometimes that like a watch that's been dropped a few too many times. So bear with me if I stumble a little bit.
Don't worry about it, man. I've been there. You got it.
Yeah, great.
Don't worry about it.
All right. So, had these headaches, treated with them in the civilian sector, had an ongoing problem. And then my uncles, who were Vietnam veterans, they suggested that I file a VA claim for VA disability and compensation for my headaches. So I did that, and because I knew I met all the criteria that I thought I needed to get a VA compensation for that claim. Not surprisingly, I was denied on my first claim, which didn't really surprise me. But what just dumbfounded me was the reason I was denied was that because they could not locate my in-service medical treatment records, and I didn't take a copy when I got discharged. So they were denying me because they couldn't locate the records that they're responsible for keeping. So that just kind of incensed me. And at that time, I just started looking for ways that I could possibly connect these headaches to being in service. And it was around 2019 that I actually brought it with me. It was this article right here from the Wall Street Times. And it says, weapons training likely causes brain injury in troops, study says. And right on the cover, you have a crew of mortarmen firing their mortar. So I read that, and it went on to discuss that the key prominent symptoms are headaches, and migraines, and it turned out I started to check a couple other boxes that I was kind of symptomatic of. So instantly I saw the connection right there, and it was like a light bulb. Of course, this is the connection. It's obvious. This is it. So from that on, I for my own benefit, I started following the science to establish evidence for my own VA claim to win that claim. But as I was doing so and learning the science, tracking down every study, then finding out who they referenced in that study, then go read their studies and that kind of thing. As I was doing that, I would share with these 11 Charlie or Mortar centric Facebook groups that I belonged to, what I was finding out. And I would pull out the excerpts from the study, from the conclusions or whatever, and say, hey guys, you need to know this. And then that turned into making videos, which use like mortars going off. You can see the big concussive wave and everything, and the dust flying, and using that with the same excerpts from the study to kind of get more of the storytelling across to what's happening and the awareness. Because I'm with you. I think that the biggest thing is that people need to be aware. Once people are aware, that will change the landscape of everything. Just realizing that there's something going on, and like before, we didn't know that there was anything we needed to be worried about. And I think that's where we're making we're gaining a lot of ground, especially with the troops on the ground, is getting them to realize that there is a connection to these blasts and brain health hazards that they need to be aware of, and knowing that exists, they'll take that extra step, like we did, to make sure your ears are plugged or whatever. I'm hoping so. made those videos, and then I decided that I needed to go on and create my own Facebook group. So I did, which was centric for mortarmen, which was you said the cohort of chronically concussed mortarmen, and that was actually what we turned into the 501c3. We did it in name only, just to get it a seat at a table. We don't have any other. We don't have a board or any. It's just me and my buddy Tim Grossman. But in any case, we founded that Facebook group, and it grew really well over years as word spread among other, military people that are exposed to these. And early last year, I was contacted by Dave Phillips of the New York Times, who did a story about the mortar, us mortarmen, and he sourced our Facebook group and me and several other members of the group in his story. And from really that point on, things have kind of taken off for the Facebook group. Now we have nearly 3,000 members, and they're all, active duty veterans, families, researchers, journalists, you name it. They're all there, but it's all a sharing community. People share the latest science, tell, stories of how they're feeling, what works for them. Guys ask for insight on how to handle their interviews with their doctors, things like that. So it's become something I'm really proud of. And in the last year, it's been sourced, I think, about half a dozen times by everybody from ABC News to NPR, and it's become a real thing, which I never thought would happen. But I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, good on you, man. I mean, it's as we become more aware of this. I remember the first time I met you was at that MITRE conference, I think about a year and a half ago, and I watched you go up, and I was really impressed with your knowledge and your ability to outline a lot of these issues. Now, you were a mortarman in a mechanized unit. You mentioned track.
Right, that's right. Good
So
catch.
those are,
Yes,
now,
most of my time was in the a mechanized armored vehicle, and then my last 3 years was just a mix of everything, doing light and.
And you shot you dropped those mortars. Those mortar tubes, if you were not dismounted, were inside the track, right? And it popped up through the hatch. So I want our readers to know that I speak on this a lot. And if you're exposed to a blast, right, and you're outside, say you're on a door or you're blowing something up, that blast wave is a certain amount of psi when it hits you. If you're inside a building or you're inside a track, which is like a cube, the amount of pressure that you experience it can be. I know it for inside a building is 5x. It's 5 times more pressure because it's contained, it's bouncing all over the place. And Todd's point about having protective hearing, the easiest way to get into the brain is through the ear canal. There's nothing there. And now we're going to put a little piece of plastic and hope that this blast wave stays out. No, and the blast wave goes through the whole body and the brain. But I just wanted folks to know that when you said track, I'm like, oh my God, he was dropped. I was a mech guy my first tour in the infantry in Germany.
So you know exactly what we're talking about. And
I was living in hotels, so I was a tow gunner.
We have a lot of members of those in our cohort too, because they get a significant amount of back pressure coming back on them from the rocket launching.
Yeah,
a lot of shoulder fires are.
You guys drop hundreds of mortars for every tow round a tow gunner gets to shoot at. I don't know what they cost a missile, right? You don't know.
That's true. Mortars are pretty much pretty close to the head of the table when it comes to eating this blast.
Yeah, those are big bullets, man.
Yeah,
big
you
bullets,
raised a great point. Being in and among hardened reflective surfaces magnifies the exposure. I like to tell when I'm on the line talking to people, imagine it as a ball of water coming out, just moving in 360 degrees as it's coming out of the muzzle. Here comes that blast over pressure. Whatever it hits, it's going to bounce off of and reflective, just as almost you can imagine water doing. So just as you said, as inside a room, it's going to hit each corner. It's going to bounce around. It's going to bounce around in your bucket and everything. So those real world circumstances really add to the problem, the exposures that are going on. And I think if I could just, because you brought up such a great point, because I think a lot of the research doesn't take into account the real world circumstances that a lot of these weapons find themselves operating in. For example, you might have heard that the latest suggestions are, and they make total sense from a scientific perspective, is just, well, distance yourself from the blast, get further away. Or the latest one for more relating to mortars is that they found that if you stoop your body down, 4 or 5 more inches, you can reduce the exposure significantly. Sorry, that's my cat.
No problem.
But but again, sometimes these happen in an enclosed space where these blast waves are bouncing around, where it totally moots the point of stooping down or stepping back. And a lot of these weapons can't be fired from distances that they're suggesting, like,
No.
a shoulder-fired rocket can't be fired from 1.7 meters away.
You can't drop a mortar and then run away from the blast either.
Right.
That thing's popping off as soon as you drop it, man.
Not while maintaining its effectiveness, its current effectiveness on the battlefield. And that's a problem with, I think, some of these recommendations, is that without understanding what makes these weapons unique and effective and what they do, these recommendations kind of detract from that sometimes, I think. And I think that might be one of the areas that the DoD has pushed back on, is, we can't really do that practically.
And there are, I remember back in my day, we used to have those sub-caliber mortar rounds where you would, at least go through the drills, because we know now that the only way to really but to reduce the severity of the problem is to reduce the amount of exposure, right? Fire less mortar rounds, and to a certain point, once you get shooting you're good with a rifle. You don't need to shoot every day, right? And we treat, in the military, P is for plenty, right? Everywhere you go. And you know that when you take those mortar rounds out to the range, nobody wants to turn them into the ASP. So what happens, right? You shoot them all. But you bring up a good point too, is that, regardless of your Article 15, much like a range safety officer, you were on the line. Whether you were, I guess you were probably teaching and doing everything that, whether you were just running mortar rounds, but talk to us about the amount of exposure that you or the typical range safety officer might get when they're actually working a mortar range, and that's their job.
A mortarman, we established our Facebook group to bring about awareness, and then a buddy teamed up with me. His name's Tim Grossman, and we decided that we needed to do more than that. So we decided to propose some legislative action. We called it the resolution to change law, and we were asking for a presumptive service connection for veterans who had illnesses that we thought were related to these occupational blast exposures. So in writing that resolution, we had to determine how many rounds we thought an average soldier was exposed to in their first 4 years of enlistment. Because when it comes to mortars, the soldiers who are going to have the most exposures are going to be the lower enlisted, because they're the ones who actually are the closest to the gun. The squad leader is usually standing back about 3 meters or so, still within blast radius, but the ones who are going to be the most affected are the squad leader. The gunner, the assistant gunner, and the ammo bearer. And they're usually going to be E1s through E3s, young, whatever. So in 4 years, we calculated that about 1,000 rounds per year. And that's that's in peacetime. That doesn't include combat deployments, which would obviously increase that a great deal. And in environments too, where they'd be behind HESCOs or dug deep into mortar pits, where the reflective waves would be even higher. So we calculated that basically about in a 4-year enlistment, around 4,000 rounds. So that's.
Do you remember what the PSI overpressure was of a mortar, depending on its the size of it?
Well, it's all obviously the bigger the bigger the mortar.
Right.
So back when I started, we had the 4.2 inch mortar, the 4 deuce,
right.
And it was, I think, 107 millimeters, I think. And then today we have the 120 millimeter mortar. So the difference in the 100, even though the 4 deuce was a little bit smaller in diameter, it had a shorter barrel and a lower muzzle. So it exposed to the crew to just as much exposure as the bigger 120 with a much higher muzzle. And I spoke with Dr. Carr from Walter Reed last year, and he was showing me these study results that he had that in the cumulative long-term aspect, the 81 millimeter is almost indistinguishable from the 120 as far as the exposure it puts on the crew. So there's really no, I would say, I guess to answer your question, what is the general PSI exposure that a soldier is getting, right? Is that kind of what you want to know for those 1,000 exposures?
Well, that's what I was, working on because I don't know if you remember that they came up with a GBEV, a generalized blast
Yeah.
exposure variable. I
Yeah.
just got done creating a spreadsheet so people can calculate their own.
Okay.
And they have 5 categories of weapons, and I think mortars are 2 or 3, right? So, but it's because like the OSHA standard of 4 psi being
Right.
safe. We know that one mortar round exceeds that, but I didn't know I forgot what the number might be.
I
But
would
then you're
say,
talking,
I would say conservatively that the average number would be over the 4 psi.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
saying the 4 psi per day, and one mortar round is
Yeah.
like, I mean, a 50 cal rifle is 15 psi, I think.
Exactly.
And so in one round, you've exceeded a day, and then you're shooting multiple rounds, and that just starts hammering the brain.
Exactly.
And of course, we're soldiers, we like it. You get that tingling, you got that shock wave going through your chest. You're like,
Yeah.
and give me some more because we think it's harmless. I mean,
That's cool.
up until you read that article. I mean, up until I just started studying this a couple of years ago. I had, and that was probably, from that article came out before my son died, but I had no idea that, of the impact of that, those concussive waves on the body. And I don't know if you know this, but I think last year do you know that there was never a diagnostic code for the brain from blast until last year? They had a diagnostic code for every organ, every every limb, everything but the brain. And they just came out with an ICD billing code, and I just put it in my brief last year, and hardly anybody knows about it. So, it's crazy, that they had that.
Did you
Nuts.
create the ICD code, or you found it?
Nope. I found it in an article. I was doing some research because we're doing these seminars, and I'll go dig it up for you. But they just figured out that they had an ICD code for the colon and for the gut and for the lung and for the heart because the blast, right, coming through you. Never, not anything for the brain. So let me ask you a question. Of the, you own a Facebook group, 3,000 kids in it. How many of those kids are having, headaches are one thing, right? I mean, those headaches usually are also, if they're associated with a damaged brain, there's usually some poor mental health outcomes that come with those. What is the prognosis of the group that you're managing right now in terms of mental health? Are you seeing kids struggle with, mental health, that have been exposed to a lot of mortar, in this case, heavy weapons?
When it's online and a social media presence, I think a lot of the guys who are truly struggling don't often really display it much. I think the veterans are more open about it in that way. When they kind of struggle. The soldiers, I see it when I go visit them on the gun line, like when I went to the mortar competition, and I can just see the guys who are just wearing it. I don't
really.
It's I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but I can just see it on the guys when it's like a shadow or an aura over them. That's like, and I see it too often, and it motivates me to just dig in even further because this is an issue that just, it needs to be talked about more. And like, it's not talked about because there's this stigma or this dogma that I think that somehow is associated with weakness or some kind of a inner flaw. And one of the tenets that I've been preaching for years is that, when you get to feeling weird, and things start feeling weird, you need to step back and take a moment to realize that maybe what you're feeling and how you're perceiving the world around you right now might be the response of an injury to your brain more than it is what you're really experiencing. You know what I mean? Maybe if you
Absolutely.
can just take that half second to just go, wait a minute, when things get weird, maybe it's just my head. I remember, I've been exposed to these booms. I've heard about all this awareness, and that's really what I think is huge. If people can just acknowledge that this is not a character flaw or a personality disorder, it's more the response to an injury than anything. And I think that takes this kind of shame that people have away and just kind of unburdens them, and it just kind of, I've had a lot of anecdotal messages. People tell me how relieved they are that it all makes sense now when you point out the science and the mechanisms, and here's why this might be. This is what's happening to your brain, and no part of your brain is not affected by these blasts, and there's no part of you that's not affected by your brain. And so just that's really been a key thing that I like to see. So as far as the prognosis, I think it's improving. This 22 a day thing just it irks me. And in fact, I asked a researcher once if that was just hyperbole or is that really like the peak number, and they said no, it's real. And
Yeah,
that just kind of dumbfounded me. And ever since then, it's been one of my primary drivers is this the suicide aspect of things. And
well, it's all about too, part of
if
what you're doing with the. Oh, go ahead.
if I may, there was
Yeah.
a study not too long ago. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they showed that suicide risk diminished greatly for veterans and soldiers who've been diagnosed with a TBI, being acknowledged that they have an injury.
Well, and the issue is that as we create the awareness, your organization, ours, others like that, we do give these guys some closure. What we have to do is move to the next step, because even though they have a TBI or they have a damaged brain, if they go to the VA, most of the VA providers out there, and most of and TRICARE especially out here, man, I go to my VA guy out there, they're not educated on it. And if they are, that's great. But all they can offer you is a bunch of drugs and therapy. Or my guy offered me Tai Chi. Like, great. All right.
Right. I
But
went to
everything,
acupuncture today.
yeah, right. All that stuff that can help fix the brain is completely off the books right now. And there is progress. TRICARE is doing some super billing for HBOD and some of the, ketamine, maybe. But, there has to be a definitive move in the approval of these modalities to help these veterans that are struggling with psychological disorders, mental illness, because we're just not doing the right thing, right? We're giving them drugs and therapy. Well, it's not impacting this, and that's where what you're doing right now is making that aware, making people aware. So, talk about the Overpressure Warfighters Act of 2025. I mean, you were critical in getting that introduced to Congress. Tell us what that bill is all about. Where's it at? And what is it trying to do for our veterans?
So really that's a bill that I wrote, that I came up with, really kind of standing on the shoulders of last year's legislation with the Blast Overpressure Safety Act and what was included in the NDAA, and also on a couple of DOD memorandums about blast overpressure. To their credit, DOD is actually doing pretty good. As frustrated as we get, sometimes we have to keep in mind that the DOD is still leading the world in as far as tackling this overpressure.
Still got to fight wars, man. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. What was the question?
No, talk to us about the Overpressured Warfighters Act of 2025. What's that all about?
We got to discussion in different conversations with colleagues of mine, journalists, other researchers, other people in industry, other affected. We got to thinking that, this latest legislation of last year, it's awesome. It's a great step in the right direction, but in a lot of ways it falls short. And, for one thing, there's no real accountability for any of it. In the end of the day, it leaves it up to the unit commanders to do what they want, and the Army to spend the money how they want. If that means if other priorities come up, they can spend it on other priorities, and there's no real kind of congressional oversight to make sure these things are being enforced on it, as far as I know, anyway. So I felt that maybe to fill these gaps, we could offer a different solution. So I wrote this bill, and I in a way that I thought, okay, so what would put an end to this? Not just continue studying the problem, but really end it. And I thought the way we need to approach this is, so the gold standard for me is, you probably heard of Dr. Pearl and his brain bank. So for me, the gold standard of understanding what's happening to the brain is what he's found out through his looking at them. So I think everything needs to be kind of re-engineered back from that. So science should be looking at how do we get here, instead of trying to figure out, does this path lead to that? Let's start with, this is what's happening. Now figure out all the ways you can prevent it from happening, if that makes any kind of sense. So I felt that in the Blast Overpressure Safety Act, we could apply some things. I feel that the DoD could use something like a BOP czar, like we have now for the border, just kind of a nonpartisan guy who just is somewhere between someone who understands all the perspectives of the DoD, the researchers, industry, and the public, but is primarily concerned with the welfare of the soldier, and can make sure that these DoD blast overpressure protocols are being implemented and they're having an effect, and we're seeing a result from it. And then on the veteran side, on the DoD side, let me just add on, I feel that the only way to tackle this blast overpressure thing is that every soldier who is in an occupation that is exposed to these blasts as part of their job, it's a job requirement. It's not a blast that happened by circumstance during their employment. This is a job requirement as part of being proficient in this job. They should be issued a blast wearable, a blast gauge, or some kind of blast dosimeter device that instantly lets you probably remember, you're old enough like me to remember the old Miles gear, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So something similar to that, but tells the soldier that beep, 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 a beep goes off saying, hey, you've had too much exposure. You need to be looked at by the docs. Go sit down, what have you. And then I think that would do a good job of ending the problem on the DoD. I think on the veteran side, we were trying to fight for presumptive service connection for veterans who were exposed to these blast overpressures. That didn't seem to be getting very far, but then then I had the notion that maybe we can use the PACT Act to help us, because I think a fair argument could be made that the blast overpressure alone could qualify as a toxic exposure to the crew. I think there would be a lot of pushback on that. But then I got to watching the videos of mortars firing and artillery firing and breachers. They're surrounded by smoke and dust and particles, and that all that is filled with carbon and dust. So then I got to thinking, well, if the blast overpressure and the smoke and dust, carbon-filled smoke and particulate dust it creates, all in the same environment, now that could probably definitely be argued as a toxic.
Just the I can remember the smell, of C4
exactly.
when
just
it cracks
smoke,
up.
just
That is not good to breathe, right?
Yeah.
And now, we're doing CQB in rooms that are filled with dust from flashbangs and bullet fragments and the cordite, right? All that stuff that you smell, you're inhaling that left and right.
We know from the burn
good.
pits, those smoke, smoke has toxic, particulates in it. So I felt that, jackpot. That's how we get presumptive service connection for veterans who are exposed to these blasts, is we tie it into the PACT Act. And then, that seemed to be the lowest hanging fruit to me. So that was the real big core of what I wanted to do with the blast overpressure. I mean, the Over Pressure Warfighters Act, just to be clear, it hasn't been introduced by anyone. I'm trying to find a home for it to be introduced. Anyone who would uh, really have the backbone to introduce it, or at least provide a good explanation as to what they think is wrong with it. I think it's worthy at least of being talked about. Maybe
Well, maybe
going
we've
before
got
a committee.
legislation. No,
Sorry.
we've got legislation with Van Orden, Congressman Van Orden, Navy SEAL, right now to provide the awareness, diagnosis, treatment, and then insurance and billing coverage for repetitive blast exposure. Veterans or veterans that have had a lot of repetitive blast exposure, and that would be an interesting thing to talk about because I never thought about that. That's a unique take on it. So maybe we could get the funding to come out of the PACT Act, or get supplemental funding to the PACT Act for those veterans that do display,
I
these.
think with the money environment that it is around Capitol Hill, I think there's no excuse for not coming up with some sort of creative way to fund this for
Yeah,
our
you
for our
can't
veterans.
doge this, dude.
You
We
know what I mean?
own this, man.
They
We
they
created it.
what
These kids are hurting.
what we're
We
asking
own it.
for amounts to a rounding error in the
Budget does,
calculations
bro.
they do. You know?
Yeah, budget does, man. It doesn't even
Yeah, yeah.
make a sense
And it
not to
could,
discuss it,
and
right?
I firmly believe that my bill, in 20 years, I did an AI model over the cost savings and whatever, and over long run, and in 20 years we can cut the suicides in half for the population that's exposed to these blasts.
I wouldn't doubt it. And if you took some of these modalities on a cost benefit basis, if you did the analysis, whether it's HBOT, TMS, some of the psychedelics, we can get veterans back on their feet way faster with better brain health than we can, charging $500, whatever we charge for these pills, in a lifetime of inactivity, of suffering in silence, of, poor mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes, and suicidality. Right. There's no doubt in my mind that there's a significant, it's not behind everything, but there's a significant segment of the population that have taken their lives that were impacted by combat and training as a result of repetitive blast exposure that was never diagnosed, never assessed. And we need to fix this. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
just, I've suffered from it. I was diagnosed with it. You've been diagnosed with it. And I'm not looking for myself. God's been good to me. What I am looking out for is all these other kids out there, and I meet them all the time. They're struggling. They're living under bridges. They can't get their act together because they can't get their brain together. It's not, and then everybody gives up on them. I was talking to somebody the other day. Their brother-in-law, took their life, and they were like, he was hopeless. He came back from Fallujah. He was a disaster. Well, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, he might have been a disaster because of Fallujah, because of his service.
Nobody ever stopped to consider maybe he's behaving. Maybe what you're seeing in him are the presentations of an injury to his brain.
Right.
People
Not a hopeless veteran
people seem
that
to
killed some people and whatever, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he was in combat, so he's crazy. No. He's got a biological origin to his mental illness. He's self-medicating. He is acting crazy because his brain hurts. So can we do something for his brain? And I think it's going to be efforts like yours that are going to be able to get us over the hump. And to your point, I mean, I think even since we met at MITRE a year and a half ago or so, man, things are improving. I mean, there is a lot of awareness on this. U.S. SOCOM is taking this up big time. But let me ask you a question. I mean, because everybody's worried about what's this going to do to the force, and I am, of the I want to get your take on it, but how do we maintain the most lethal force in the world? We still need mortarmen, right? You're going to have AI or robotic dogs dropping, mortars down tubes and all that. It still needs to be done. And I think that there's a way to minimize the exposure. What are your thoughts on all of this? Because we still got to train. We still got to fight.
Absolutely. And I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think I sympathize with the DoD's perspective or the Army's perspective a little bit too. I don't I don't think this blast overpressure thing is some seven-headed hydra we have to run from and stick our head in the sand from or obfuscate and say we need more.
Like
I,
we've been doing for the
yeah,
last
I think
25 since
instead
9/11.
if we just turned and faced it and locked shields and drew it out into the light, we could slay this thing pretty easy. With just smart training, like I said, I think the key to that is I give pushback when it comes to when we're starting to see where the academics and the politicians are starting to set operational procedures because of what they think is what the lab results tell them, without really consulting with the guys who live it every day on the ground and whatnot. So I think a great way to do that is we have to let DoD keep operational control of how they do these things, because it's what makes us so great at what they do, or them so great at what they do. I think the key to that is giving command control of when the soldiers had enough by allowing them to mandating that they have to have these sensors on. When a sensor goes off, just like with the Miles gear back in the day, you can't turn it off yourself. You have to have an evaluator come by and, he can hold up 3 fingers and, ask you what day it is, or, this guy needs a break, or he can reset it and say, you're good to go back to the line. I think just that right there would take a huge bite out of the excessive exposures. Another thing you said with the too many rounds, instead of firing them all off, why not give the unit commanders some kind of funding credit for turning the rounds back in, or something like that? You know what I mean?
And they're talking, and to your point, is like, the Army I'm from the Cold War like you, right? When I first got the Special Forces, we basically had sticks. We had nothing, dude.
Pew, pew, pew.
We didn't have CQB, we didn't have flashbangs, we didn't have grenades, we had rifles, and we went down range and we taught guys how to, and we had mortars, right? Loved mortars, man. As a matter of fact, when I served in the war in El Salvador, I made sure I did 2 things. I went to the SF medical course and the SF mortar course before I went down range, because we didn't even have helicopters or howitzers in that war. We had nothing, right?
Yeah.
So we had mortars. But the issue becomes that, in training, we don't have to, once you're good at mortars, you're good at mortars. Not that you still need to do that training, but we don't need to, you can do subconcussive round training. You can set up them tubes all the time. And honestly, look, you're 11 series. I think everybody should be a mortarman. So why don't you rotate out to the squad, right? Be a grunt, carry rifles, and let the grunts become, 11H, 11 Charlie, 11 Bravo, we're all 11s, right? And so I think even rotating through these different MOSs, because it's all about reducing the total amount of exposure. That's the only way to clear this up. But, good.
Go ahead.
No, but if we know it's going to hurt you, then to your point, when you get out of the Army owns the damage that is caused to you in order to defend this wonderful and amazing country and maintain the most lethal force in the world. You get disability and you get treatment. Because if we do treat the brain, I'm 63 years old. I just had my nightmare like 2.5 years ago. We're talking to kids that are dealing with this as soon in the Army, then they get out. We can't cure this, but we can make their lives better. Like to the point where it's not debilitating. They can get on with their life, and their service was worth it, because there's so much fun serving your country. And it's so honorable serving your country. And yeah, I'll take what I went through. I'd do it all over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't want to educate the VA like I had to on repetitive blast exposure to get my disability, right? I'm like, come on. And I wasn't even looking for disability. I just said, I want to stop stuttering. I want to remember where my car keys are. And I don't want to be angry no more. So can you fix this? And they said, yeah, you got a messed up brain, drugs and therapy. So I went and treated myself. But to your point, I think you're absolutely right. It's about total exposure, and we can train better. I like your idea of a blast page. Of course, it's going to get all these scientists, and you made a point earlier. We don't need to research TBIs anymore. We don't even need to research repetitive blast exposure. We know it's an issue. We know it harms our guys. It harms our girls.
We need to take action. We have enough science now action.
Yeah.
And like you
Take
said,
that, all that
my helmet
knowledge.
thing, just smarter
Yeah,
training.
talk about this.
Protect.
Pimp yourself, man. Talk to me about
That
what do you call it? The Petra 6. Pelta.
Pelta 6. It means
Yeah, what is it?
so it's old Greek.
Go over there and get it. That's behind you, right?
All right, hang on.
Yeah, go get that. You had that at that show that day.
So
This
it's
is pretty cool.
Old Greek for little shield at your 6 o'clock. Okay. So I'm a mortarman, and as you know, when mortarmen hang the round and they fire the round, they turn their head away, and that exposes the back of their head and their cerebellum to the blast waves. In fact, almost every heavy weapon crew does that. Okay. So, and I have my own problems in the back of my head there, so I thought maybe there's a connection. And then one day I just happened to be looking at footage of all the different weapons firing, and everybody turns their head away from the blast, leaving the cerebellum and the top of the spine
Because you tilt your head back
to the
up.
blast.
All of it's
Mortars that can be with mortars that can be an arm's length away from the blast. So I thought, maybe some protective gear there could help do that. And it's been a success. We think it can cut the blast exposure by 50% when we get it on soldiers. So we're pretty optimistic.
You've been able to do any studies on that?
What's that?
Have you done any studies on that? Has anybody tested it?
Yes, we have actually. We've done some field testing with 1st Special Forces Group on a test mannequin, and then we did some testing with Virginia Tech in their blast simulator.
Wow.
So we've pretty much proved the concept, and we presented those results at the latest NATO researchers meeting up in Toronto. But to dovetail on what you're saying, what the DoD can do about it is that's just another thing. Smarter training, put protective gear. There's a lot of ways that protective gear can be used that would probably take a good chunk of the exposure out of these guys. And
going back to the helmets that actually cover the ears. I know they're heavier, but that that can prevent the blast from getting to the ear canals or because these things don't help. Your Peltors or your ear, whatever you got, they don't stop that from coming through. And sometimes for these kind of situations, maybe
to work in the problem solving instead of the
we have to research.
I understand it's a whole new terra incognita of research that they'd love to go explore, but we have enough, and there's soldiers and veterans who are in need right now of solutions, and that we have enough to provide it to them. And I think just being acknowledged when a soldier or veteran goes to the doctor and is complaining of these concussive type symptoms, they can't no longer be made to feel that they're the problem. Look, you don't have a documented TBI incident, so therefore you're the problem. You know what I mean? So I would like to see in the DoD and VA, just like when you go into triage for anything else, they ask if you're a smoker or you're a drinker. Yes, no, whatever. I'd like to see them ask, were you exposed to blast occupationally in the service?
Yeah, that should be part of every VA. That should be part. Yep.
If you were, then your triage goes this way, and then everything, because then we need to start looking at the brain being the central cause of everything that's going on with you,
Absolutely,
or at least a common denominator. So I think
that's the goal.
Just smart steps like that, no longer running from this monster, and instead just turn and facing it. We can. We're Americans. We can solve anything, especially soldiers. You know what I mean?
And you got to make it right, man. These kids didn't do anything wrong. I mean, God, the stories I run into out there, and it's just horrible. And it's not curable, but it is. It is treatable.
It's preventable.
And we can make it a lot better with what's out there. And
like you said earlier, we soldiers, we'll take it. I don't, I'll go do it all over again. A soldier doesn't care. I didn't really want to be a mortarman, but when I became one, I thought they were. I thought that after becoming one, and seeing what they could do, I thought they were the coolest thing ever.
Heck yeah! I didn't never want to be a mortarman when I saw you guys humping those tubes and the plates. And then then one day, our guy said, "Hey, we're going to dismount and carry a tow." I'm like, "What?" And we had to carry the tripod, that big box. I was like, "Man, I wish I was a mortarman."
Yeah.
It was horrible, man.
You wouldn't wish it long.
Oh man, we used to carry those little 60 millimeter, those little baby mortars,
Yeah,
man.
man.
Those were a lot of fun, dude. We shot.
And that's a good point. Even the 60 millimeter puts off a pretty good punch, because the key thing with the 60 millimeters, you're so close to it.
Yeah, that thing's like,
you're less than
yeah.
an arm's length away from, boom,
And it
boom,
don't stick
boom.
over your head, man. That thing's
Yeah,
below
it's
you. You're
right in the
below your
face.
head, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, dude.
So,
So
yeah, soldiers shouldn't have to, they shouldn't have to go, especially veterans shouldn't have to go through some kind of evidentiary process to try to prove that they're hurting from something that was a job requirement.
I
That
like
we
the
have
term
enough.
presumptive, man. That's
Yeah,
pretty cool, dude.
yeah.
I like it. Man, you've done a lot, Todd, man. I'm
I
really,
appreciate
really
that.
proud of
I
you, dude.
appreciate the
I
kind
think it's
words.
great. What do you got? So how do people find you, man? What's your next steps? Talk about Todd here a little bit before we close out.
Okay. Our website is www.overpressure.com. And we're still just about our core, is spreading awareness and offering solutions of how we pull this thing out of the dark and beat the shit out of it. Uh, so we offer, awareness through our community collaboration there, where, a place for people to go and talk about, hey, this is new to me. It's starting to make sense. How do I find out more? How do I explain this to my doctor? What science can I show them? That kind of thing. And then, on the legislative front, great, great strides have been made, but we're still a long way to go. So, we felt that we could offer a solution there. That's why we came up with the Over Pressure Warfighters Act. It's a big upfront cost, but like you said, we could find that money now, and it'll pay for itself 10 times over.
10 times over, man. And
20
every
years.
life we save is
Yeah,
worth that
exactly.
entire bucket of money, because these kids don't need to go, and they're just leaving us too soon. And it's horrible to even think about, man. But no, well, thank you for all you're doing, Todd. You're an
I appreciate it.
amazing
It was great to
American.
be here. Great talking to you again.
Thank you for your service. I hope to get our friend Paul Scanlon on. Of course, I'll have to get up at like 3 a.m. to interview him or something.
I would
man.
love to see that. Well, that would be a lively conversation for sure.
That would be a lively conversation, man. Hey, Denny, put Paul Scanlon on the list. We'll have to make that one happen.
Yeah.
And but no, he's a great guy, man. But thank you so much, Todd, for coming on the show. We wish you all the best of luck. We're going to absolutely reach out to the Mac Parkman Foundation for a collaboration perspective. Please feel free to come out to the summit on the 2nd and 3rd. If you want to put a table up, talk to everybody. It's all about repetitive blast exposure. You're one of the industry experts on it. And we really appreciate everything you're doing for our servicemen and women out there, man. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Likewise, Bruce. I know you're very passionate and fully invested in this and as well. And it's been something that's been neat to me as I entered into this over the last year or so, is seeing how many other passionate, invested people there are in trying to solve this problem and put an end to it and bring understanding to it. So I salute you guys as well. And thank you for giving me the time to come on and talk with you.
Great minds, great people. We'll get it done, man. We do great things. Great
That's
minds,
right.
Great people, great things.
I think of my cohort a lot as like a Roman cohort. We're
I noticed that, man. You got all that gladiator stuff going on, man. That's pretty cool.
Are locked, right?
Yeah, I like that. I'm borrowing that one, man. Good.
Yeah, cool.
Well, all right, folks. Another great episode of Broken Brains with myself, Bruce Parkman, sponsored by the Mac Parkman Foundation. Really appreciate your presence today. Don't forget, I say it every time, if you got children, you got grandchildren, you're going to have children, get this book. It's on our website. It's free. Everything you know about contact sports and what we can do to make sports safer. Just like we talked about making the military safer, which we can, we're going to make sports safer for yourselves and your children. Don't forget the second International Summit on Repetitive Brain Trauma is going to be held in Tampa, September 3rd and 4th. We'll go ahead and get all that on our website here pretty soon. A lot going on. So take care of yourselves. Take care of your brains. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on another episode of Broken Brains. And take care.